Thank you, guys. OK, so I know we're after lunch, so you might be a little sleepy. So we'll have a quick question for you guys first. So how many of you, can you give me a show of hands, have worked with Scrum at scale? So in a situation where you have a few teams that work on a single product. Come on, give me a show of hands. OK, so I'm hoping that some of the things that I will be talking about today will reach you and you'll find it interesting and you can apply it in your work. I've actually been working in such setups for quite a while right now. And when I started that, there weren't really many frameworks ready that could give me a hint on how to actually approach scaling Scrum. So what I did with a lean perspective in mind, we said, OK, so let's try some things. Let's see what works and what doesn't work. And today, I would like to share with you some of those stories, some of those experiments that we tried with scaling Scrum. Some of them obviously were successful and great, and I would like to pinpoint those. Some of them were actually failures, so please don't laugh at me. Those might have been silly ideas, but at that point in time, we thought that, hey, why not try? Right now, scaling Scrum is a hot topic, I would say. Over the last year or two, there have been a lot of discussion regarding scaling Scrum. And we've got a few frameworks that have been published. Some are pretty simple, like the LESS framework or the Nexus framework. Some are extremely complicated. And when you just look at those, you feel like, oh my God, this is so confusing and difficult, and it adds all that overhead to my process. So do I really need that? Do I need that complexity? And do I need that overhead to just run my project? Especially when you're in a scenario when you have like 3 or 4 teams, and that communication isn't really that hard to facilitate. Because, OK, I understand that if you're dealing with multiple, like dozens of teams, you might need something heavier. But most of the time, I see products that have a few teams working on them. And I really believe that when you're in such a setup, you really don't need all those extra things. So jumping into the story of my teams and my work, let's start with a structure, high-level structure. This is what we started with, because this is basically a representation of what you're getting as a first tip for scaling Scrum. So Scrum of Scrums. Let's have a few teams, and let's have a meeting that's called Scrum of Scrums. And that consists of either a product owners or Scrum Masters or developers. You don't really get any idea where to start. So we've tried quite a few of those approaches. And yeah, it really doesn't work as you would imagine it would. What tends to happen in such a scenario when you have separate teams with separate product owners, separate Scrum Masters, you get people focused on their teams really strongly. This sometimes leads to a blame culture. When you're supposed to work on a single product in multiple teams, everyone kind of goes their own way. And it's very hard to sell the whole vision to all those teams, because everyone focuses only on their goals. And if something goes wrong, he blames the other guy. Because, like, it's not us that are at fault, it's the other team, right? We don't have a common vision then, because, well, who has the global product vision in this picture? Well, I couldn't pinpoint a single person who would be capable of that. So we tried a different approach. We switched it around, I would say. We figured out that, well, if this is a single product, it should have a single product owner. Even better, if they would have also a single Scrum Master. And it seems that it worked quite well. And what else? It scaled quite well. Because if you have a single product, we're talking about single product here, then you don't get all that context switching. Why we don't want a single product owner or a single Scrum Master working in multiple teams? Well, pretty much why we don't want developers to work on different tasks at the same time. You get a lot of context switching, and that wastes your time. If you're working on a single product, you don't get all that much of context switching because you're working on a single project most of the time. So that saves you that cost. If you have a very large project, a very large product that's complicated, complex, you might want to try having a single master product owner or a chief product owner. But you need to have that one person who has the product vision and can share it with all those teams. You might have product owners and scrum masters in the teams, if that's a complex scenario, but still, it's always great to have that single person who has the product vision and has the process vision for those teams. What's important here from the other side, because we're saying, okay, so like we have a single product owner, we have a single product Scrum Master, why not have a single development team? Let's just have all those guys work in one huge development team. Or maybe let's call them 3 separate teams, but in reality, they're kind of a one large team that shares developers. So whenever someone needs to go help out another team, let's let him do that. Well, in reality, you lose a lot here because teams develop a team conscience, a team identity. And if you throw them in a big bag, you lose that. So on this level, my experience is that it's always best to have those teams separate and isolated from each other on a regular day-to-day basis. But what happens on the lower level? When you go down into particular Scrum events, because that's how I would like to go through with the presentation here. So let's start with the daily Scrum, because that's where actually most of the integration, most of the day-to-day talk should happen by the book. Well, yeah, the first thing that we tried was a global daily Scrum, obviously. So like, let's get all those people in a single room during daily Scrum and have them talk to each other. And guess what? How many of you have been to a boring meeting? Yeah. I guess no one likes those, as Pavel mentioned earlier. Yeah, no one liked it either. People hated those daily Scrums. They were long. They were boring. And they didn't really bring in all that much value because people were focused on their own tasks, the tasks that were relevant to their sub-teams. And when you were sharing all that with a whole huge, like a 20-person team, it didn't really have that impact that you're gaining when you're doing a proper daily Scrum in your small team. What happens next? So we said, okay, so like the global daily Scrum doesn't make sense. So let's try doing both. Why not have the smaller, regular 5 to 8 people daily Scrums in the smaller teams, and then have a large meeting where we integrate and talk about things that are relevant to each of the other teams? Well, it didn't really work out that well either, because, well, you were getting a lot of value from the regular daily Scrum, but the large one was also, again, boring and rarely brought in any value at all. Sometimes things appeared over there, but really, most of the time, it was just wasting your time. The other thing that was tried then, daily Scrum visits. So like, okay, so let's not bring everyone in a single room. Let's have one guy from each team visit the other teams that we're working with. And if he hears something interesting, he'll pick up on the topic, or he'll bring back the topic to his own team. Well, in theory, it seemed quite nice, but in reality, the teams, during their daily stand-up, are really often going into detail, and they're discussing things that are only understandable to them. So whenever someone from the outside, from a different team, who focuses on a different piece of functionality at that moment, came into the room, he really couldn't grasp what's going on. And is it something that's worth mentioning in my team or not? It was very hard for them to do that. And in the end, most of the time, that representative was coming back to his home team, and what he said was, well, nah, I don't know, they were just talking about some feature they're developing, nothing that really interested me. So, what was the best approach that actually worked for us was going with this structure, because this allowed us to have those two people who shared the context of all the separate teams. And whenever something came up during a single daily stand-up, they could bring that information to the other team because they knew which team was working on what, and that helped them a lot to pick up those relationships between teams and bring it up in a discussion in the second team. And it didn't cost us a lot of time to do that because those people were in context and helped a lot here. Moving on, the product backlog. So, like, you have a single product. Well, if you have a single product, you should have a single product backlog. That's the logical way to go, in my opinion. And this really worked well for us because the product owner has a single place where he can manage the product, where he can set priorities. On the other hand, when you go to the team level, you should have a sprint backlog because a sprint is something that's inherent to a Scrum team, not to a product. It's something to do with the team and the way a team plans their work. So every team should have their separate sprint backlogs. How you arrive at that, I'll get back to that in a minute when I talk about sprint planning. Sprint review, on the other hand, is something where you demo the product. So if you demo a product, that means you should probably have a single sprint review because you're reviewing the product. There are a few causes to that. One is that it's a great opportunity to share knowledge. I haven't talked about that yet a lot, but when you do a sprint review, you're showing off changes to the product. So each of the team that works on the product should actually know what's happening because they might be working on a piece of functionality that some other team changed a few sprints ago. So it's worth sharing that knowledge among the team. The other thing is you're getting all those stakeholders in your sprint review meetings. They might not have time to attend multiple meetings within the sprint period. You might only have this one single opportunity to get all those people in the room and give you feedback on your product. So it's always best to have a single meeting and get all that feedback in a single meeting, so you don't waste everyone's time. Because we need to take care of our clients' time as well as our own. So this was something that was hugely beneficial for us. Retrospectives come after the sprint review. So we had a few approaches here as well. We tried common sprint retrospectives, and they worked out pretty much the same way the common daily stand-ups did. So they were long, they were boring, and what's else wrong here? Most of the time, not everyone got a chance to speak. Because if you have like a dozen or 24 people in a room, it's really hard for everyone. If everyone takes a few minutes to speak, suddenly it expands to a few hours of talking. And no one really wants to spend a few hours in a retrospective. I'm sure you agree with that. So what worked for us is having separate retrospectives. And what's important here, each of those teams, even though they work on the same product, things we talk about during retrospectives aren't necessarily only product related. They're related to our process. They're relating to the people that are on our team. So, well, not all of those problems will be the same among different teams. That's why each of the team may come up with different things during their retrospectives. And again, it saves time. What you might wonder about here is, okay, so how do you avoid talking about the same things over and over again in each of those teams, and how do you share that knowledge? Well, that's where the common Scrum Master and Product Owner role come into place. They attend all those meetings, and they can pick up on those similarities, and they can share that knowledge among other teams. And what we observed in our teams is actually people who were very curious about what happened in the other team's retrospective. So there was this need for a person who can actually share that knowledge and share those ideas among different teams. Sprint planning, that's what happens after usual retrospectives. So as I said, we have two backlogs. We have the product backlog that's a single one, because that's a product thing. So we need to have the product owner work with a single product backlog. And then we have separate team sprint backlogs. This was something that required some extra work from the product owner, and this was pre-planning work, where the product owner actually divided work initially on a high level between the teams he worked on. What worked even better over here was to have a general idea, what's the specialty of each of those teams? Can we create something like sub-products within our product so that so that it's easier for us to direct way into those sub-teams? That worked greatly for us, and that also decreased the number of dependencies between those two teams, because we could definitely, okay, so this work will, this feature regards this area of the product, so definitely this needs to go to team A. But this is the way, this is an extra work that the head product owner needs to do. After that initial division of the product, teams work out their own sprint plans, because they don't really need to know in detail how work is planned in different teams. Obviously, if we run into dependencies, then we will be talking about it to resolve those dependencies. But on a high level, you do your sprint planning separately. You don't get all those 20 people in a room to do that. Now, a few things to finish up, because we don't have a lot of time to go. Some of the things that those frameworks I showed you at the very beginning don't talk about. So bugs. This is a question that often comes up. How do you deal with bugs? If you have bugs that are not really related to a feature that you're just developing, these are just regression bugs or bugs that come from production. Well, we've tried a few things. I'll share two of those, which are, in my opinion, equally good. It just depends on your situation. One is having a team that's handling bugs in a given time period. So let's say during sprint one, all those bugs that cannot be directly linked to a specific team go to that team. During the second sprint, we switch our funnel, and all those bugs will go to team 2. And so on and so forth. When we reach the end of the queue, we go back to team 1. Obviously, there's a risk of bugs that take a week or two to solve, but those are edge cases, and most of the time you can deal with that efficiently. The other idea was actually having a round-robin mechanism that would actually dynamically assign bugs to different teams. So whenever a bug appeared, it's directed the way of a particular Scrum team. Works well as well, depends on what's best for your scenario. Other things, tech demos. That's actually something that worked quite well for some time in one of those teams. So you have a sprint review where you talk about your product and show off your product. Why not have a similar meeting that's more technology-oriented, where you talk about cool new features that you develop in the product and show off to other developers, not to your stakeholders, not to the business guys, but you share the technical knowledge with the other developers. That's a great thing to do, so that everyone on your teams, on your multiple teams, are on the same page with regard to your code base and what's happening in your product's code. The other thing was having particular teams as so-called architects of particular components of your application. If the application is large and you need to have a common thought on how things are organized in your application, then it's great to have those particular teams heads of architecture for given components, so that whenever you need to decide on, okay, so how do we approach this problem in a given area of your product, you know that, okay, those guys are responsible for architecture in this area of your product. Last but not least, communities. So places where your developers can exchange knowledge freely, whether it's a particular problem that they need to solve in a given moment, or it's general knowledge sharing about frameworks that we're using, approach to automated testing, whatever. It's always great to have a community where you can speak to your fellow developers and share that knowledge, especially in a multiple team scenario. Right. In summary, I know that some of you might be even more confused than at the very beginning, because you just heard of yet another method to organize your work. And yeah, I do realize that. And what I want to show you about that, these are my experiments. This is something that I've seen, and it not necessarily needs to work in your case, just as any given framework that you try for scaling Scrum. So what I'm trying to say here is there is no silver bullet that will solve all of your problems. You need to read up, do your reading, learn as much as you can, but ultimately, if you want to scale Scrum, experiment. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thanks for this talk. Let's call it the Aziuk method. Is it?
No trademarks. Creative Commons license.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Is it close to anything else that exists, or is it very completely different or much similar?
I would say, well, it's not really how I came up with this. It was more of the experimental, as I said, experimental approach. But a lot of these are just common sense, I would say, that works out in practice. And you'll see many of those ideas are similar to what you see in those frameworks. I think Less comes the closest. Nexus is also a little similar, but it adds much more complexity to the something that we've simplified to having a single product owner and a Scrum Master. They're calling it a integration team that has also developers in it, has their separate sprints, so it's more complex on that level. But on the lower level, it's pretty much the differences in the details.
Okay, but do you think, I mean, can you figure out why they made different choices than you? Is it really like context dependent, or?
I would say when I looked at those frameworks, I imagine they're addressing a situation that when there are a lot of dependencies between the teams, meaning like you work concurrently on the same area of code in multiple teams. And that's when I feel that something of like an integration team might come in handy. But when you're in a simpler environment, and I believe that most of the time you have at least a little separation between those teams. And if you have that kind of separation, then you can go with a simpler method.
We are talking here about scalability of Scrum. From your experience, or from your experiments actually, how far did you scale it? How many Scrum teams were involved? And how do you deal with the fact that you are sort of creating a single point of failure in the product owner?
So as for the first question, this approach worked best when we were working with 3 teams. So that's why I said at the very beginning that it works best when you have a 3 to 4 team setup. because then you can have a single person who grasps what's going on in the product. The largest organization, the largest product I've been working on had around 15 or 16 Scrum teams working on it. And what ultimately happened is that teams were divided into clusters, I would say, of 3 to 4 teams, and each of those teams got a head product owner. They had their own product owners within the teams, but they had a head product owner at the top that was the source of the vision for that area of the product.
Thank you, Łukasz, for this. That was very beneficial. And my question, because you mentioned the integration team of Nexus, and when you said that in this experiment, in this approach that you took, you had a single product owner and then single Scrum Master, and their role would be also one of the things that they could would be to just observe the patterns across or among all the teams, like for example things that come up on the retrospectives and so on. Do you think does it how to say that, like, do you think that Scrum Master and or product owner needs to possess technical skills in order to be able to just, you know, address these technical issues that come up? Because like that was my thought when you were saying about it, and that's why I thought about integration, you know, consistent developers.
I believe not, because I'm not a very technical person myself, and still I kind of managed to pull this off, so to say. I believe the Scrum Master needs to have the skills to make those things come up in the discussion, so that it's mostly achieved by asking the right questions and working with your team, so that the team shares with you the possible integration risks with other teams. It's not that you need to, obviously you're well aware of that, you don't need to solve those problems yourself. Sometimes it's just enough for you to say, okay, so I see that within this area we might have a dependency with the other team, so come on Marek, let's go to team B and talk about it with them after our stand-up.
It's a bit out of context when we are just discussing at the general level. I just guess that there is some sort of discussions that happen, for example, on retrospectives, that I feel like I'm getting lost after 45 seconds maximum. If they're more technical, and just this is something probably that I'm afraid of, that sometimes if I work in one team at the moment, working the scaled Scrum, let's say, and just my fear is that if I had like 3 teams that I would work with, and there would be different technical discussions, and I really mean like technical about solution within the product. I'm not that sure if I would be able to just catch that guys in different teams are talking about similar area or something, and I would still need somebody to, you know, to be present on this meeting, to be able to just, you know, judge on that.
I would ask the team that. So I would just tell them that, okay, I recall a discussion that seems to be in a similar topic from the other team. Can you tell me if it's actually relevant? Because if it is, let's just try to grab the subject matter expert from the other team and have him pitch in on the conversation. I would treat the other teams as, you know, external experts that can be brought in for a discussion if that's beneficial for the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Łukasz.
Thank you very much.